Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kanoa Reviews. Today we talk about Resident Evil 7. Since the recently released Resident Evil 3 did not get very good reviews, I wanted to go back to one of the better ones. I reviewed the remake of Resident Evil 2 as well, when it came out, so be sure to check out that review too. Resident Evil has always had a special place for me personally, as it was my very first encounter with horror games back in the day. During the time of the original Resident Evil series on the PlayStation 1, I was too young to bother, since I was only 6 or 7 at the time and was more interested in games like Pokemon. But around the age of 11 or 12, I wanted to experience some more thrilling and scary stuff, possibly triggered by games like Majora's Mask. When the GameCube was launched, the remake of Resident Evil 1 was one of the early titles that were released, and it's the first in the franchise that I played. From the Resident Evil remake, I then jumped to Resident Evil 4 and eventually also 5 and 6. Where I thought Resident Evil 4 was phenomenal and Resident Evil 5 offered a new experience in the form of co-op, I thought Resident Evil 6 was absolute hot garbage with a boring and cliché story, unlikable characters, uninteresting gameplay, and an absolute lack of horror and scares. Therefore, I was so happy to find out that Resident Evil 7 would bring it back to its roots of being a horror game first. I read an article that stated that at Capcom, the development team was divided into two camps, those who preferred the game to be a slow horror game and those who preferred it to be an action game. I definitely feel stronger towards the team that prefers it to be a horror game, and I hope that with the remakes, they will not forget to create a new scary title in the franchise in the near future. Resident Evil 7 is the game in the franchise that feels so incredibly different from all of its predecessors, yet stays true to its formula with its type of puzzles, enemies, and items that you find. The game is in first person, which is an excellent choice since it makes all the scares and environments much more personal, and you can really take in the atmosphere better this way. You play as Ethan, who visits Louisiana in order to find his missing girlfriend after a disturbing video of her popped up. You arrive at an abandoned house, and what becomes immediately apparent is how beautiful the game is. Even nowadays, the game still looks great, though it's mostly because of the lighting and shader effects rather than the textures. The textures can actually look a bit blurry if seen up close. Character facial animations are excellent, and the only thing that is a little odd is the strand hair of characters like Mia, Ethan's missing girlfriend. Gross details like rotting carcasses, cockroaches that are skittering everywhere, and excellent sound design make it to where this game initially does not feel like a Resident Evil game at all, maybe more like a Silent Hill title. The intro sequence of the game is in my opinion legendary, where the game dials it up from 0 to 10 in about 5 minutes after finding your girlfriend. Something has taken over her, and you end up in a bloody fight that takes place in multiple stages all around the house. The visceral gore is excellent and really graphic. She stabs a knife right through your hand. You lunge an axe into her shoulder, and she even cuts off your hand with a chainsaw. My mouth was wide open when I first saw this, because I don't think anyone expected this much violence to happen to the main character this early on. Immediately, the bar is set high when you finally get your first firearm, a handgun, and go face to face with Mia as she cuts her way through walls and doors to get to you. This fight was probably a nudge and homage to the chainsaw sequence that was so legendary in Resident Evil 4, but since this is all in the attic, it makes the entire experience much more personal and comparable to the threat you had in Resident Evil 1. When the intro is over, you get introduced to the Baker family, a redneck family that caters to your typical inbred psycho family from movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Your hand is stapled back together and are now left alone to explore the house and find a way to escape. From this point on, you will find items like herbs, chem powder to combine items, and more that reminisces back to the old school Resident Evil vibe. Inventory management also becomes a thing from this point on and really harbors back to the survival horror trope where you never have enough space to bring everything with you. You are going to have to make choices on leaving some stuff behind or throwing something away if you find an item that you think is a lot better. After the insane intro, the game then takes a step back and you will have to sneak around the house while Jack Baker, the father, is patrolling the halls. Initially, you don't have anything to defend yourself with, but if you get caught, you can easily outrun him and hide. It's a sequence that is much more fun to play than many of the indie horror games where you need to sneak around, and if you are spotted, the monster immediately runs for you and kills you in an instant. There are still surprising elements though in the section, like the possibility for Jack to burst through the wall to give you a good scare. Not too long after, you will have your first boss fight with Jack in the garage, and the weapons at your disposal are a knife and handgun. The cool thing about this fight, and also common with the Resident Evil formula back in the day, is that this battle can be played slightly different depending on the choices that you make. If you fight Jack on foot for too long, he will get into the car and try to drive you over. But if you get in the car yourself, you could be the one who is doing the damage by slamming into him. After the fight is over, you get to explore more of the house, and it becomes even more apparent how much of a Resident Evil game this actually is. The door to the outside can only be opened by inserting 3 dog head emblems, and the shotgun at the end of the hall needs to be replaced by a replica in order to unlock it. These are all nudges to the older games in the series, and I love that the game is not afraid to still feel like a video game while at the same time providing a terrifying, realistic looking experience. The fact that you have to search for items, interact with objects to solve puzzles, and find new ammo types and weapons makes the actual gameplay aspect fun and more varied than your average horror game nowadays that are mostly walking simulators. The game is also a constant struggle for ammo, as you are always low on it compared to how many enemies you need to kill. You will eventually come across the so-called Molden, black gooish zombie creatures that make up for your regular enemy type in the game. This design is unfortunately one of the weaker aspects of the game, as they lack any personality whatsoever. Don't feel all that original, and there's not a whole lot of variety in the types. You have a regular one, a quick one that jumps and crawls in the walls much like lickers do, and then a heavy type that spits acid. It's your archetypes of infected monsters that we have seen so many times before, and having actual zombies might have been better since that puts a more clear face on the enemies you encounter. But the fact that you can fight back in this game and not only have to run and hide is a godsend. Gameplay where you just have to hide has become very boring and repetitive, often resulting in trial and error gameplay that takes away the threat or scare after you've redone a section 3 or 4 times. Here, there's always a threat lurking even if it's not that scary when you're fighting the enemies. You always have only a handful of ammunition, and when the monster gets closer and closer and you miss another shot, you really start sweating as you don't want to end up without bullets and have to resort to your pocket knife. It brings the dilemma of choice whether to confront an enemy or run past it, something that is also important in both Resident Evil 1 and 2, since there was never enough ammo to deal with all the enemies in the game. As you explore the Baker estate, you also get to encounter different types of horror, and I think this aspect is one of the most brilliant aspects of Resident Evil 7, and something that not enough people talk about. Basically, there are 3 types of horror that the game serves you. For the first part of the game, it offers the slasher type of horror, where a bulking mountain of a man is stalking you through the house with weapons like an axe or shovel. It is reminiscent of slashers like Friday the 13th, Halloween, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you have dealt with Jack, you move towards the garden house, where you will face against Marguerite, the mother. She is more bug than human, and this whole section revolves around creepy crawlers as you face spiders, mosquitoes, and other critters. This is then the second type of horror that adheres more to the monster movies, where some type of animal or insect is hunting the main character down. Then finally you get to confront the son Lucas in what only can be described as an homage to Saw, where you have to solve various mechanical traps and a really cool puzzle labeled Happy Birthday. So this offers then the third type of horror, which is the trap torture style like Saw and Hostel. It has some type of horror for everyone, and these 3 parts of the game, including the intro, are absolutely excellent. It is a shame therefore that the part that comes after, which takes place on a big ship, is quite weak, with you just having to face the same type of molten enemies over and over again. The intro sequence to the boat level is cool with a little ghost girl popping up, but the payoff is a bit lackluster. Luckily, the final boss is then again very climactic, and a nice reference to Chris Redfield at the end of the game makes the ending complete. I'm also very happy that it's one of those endings where the evil gets defeated and the main character gets away somewhat still intact. The game will probably be about 7 to 8 hours on the first playthrough, but I completed it in between 5 and 6 on my second playthrough, and 4 of those 5.5 hours are absolutely excellent. The fact that the final hour, except the end boss, is not that strong is a bit of a letdown, but not that much that it ruins the overall experience. I find the balance and quality in Resident Evil 2 a bit more jarring, where only the first half is really excellent in the police station, and the later half in the sewer and the research facility are quite dull. Overall, Resident Evil 7 is a true gem of a game and a testament to what happens if a game company takes a step back and goes back to the drawing board. It's actually my favorite Resident Evil after the Resident Evil 1 remake, and yes, that means I do find it better than Resident Evil 2 and even 4, which, even though I was blown away by that game at the time, the controls of that game have not aged well at all when I recently started playing that again. In the end, Resident Evil 7 gets an 8.9. It's just a slither away from legendary status because of the section on the ship, but all in all, a game that true horror fans should experience at least once. The hard difficulty in this game is also excellent, with its going further than just offering enemies with more hit points. Puzzles are different, and items are in other locations, and even enemy behavior patterns become different, like Jack patrolling a much larger part of the house. Don't miss your chance to face your fears in this awesome game.